Shalom, Shoshanim. Coffee. Are you sure it's coffee and not, for example, vodka tonic? No, you trust me, isn't it? But that's the question of today's video. Why do we trust narcissists and borderlines? My name is Sam Vaknin. I'm the author of Malignance of Love, Narcissism Revisited, and a professor of psychology. Why do we often believe and trust narcissists and borderlines when they tell us what had happened, what are the facts, what is and what is not? Why do we fall for the statements, promulgations, proclamations, and very often lies? The answer is surprising, because these are not lies. Psychopaths lie. Psychopaths prevaricate in order to secure goals because they're goal-oriented. They would lie in order to obtain a goal, to manipulate, to deceive. They're Machiavellian. Narcissists and borderlines lie. Of course they do. And they lie as much as the general population. However, they don't lie malevolently, maliciously. Their lies are not goal-oriented, not premeditated. They're not cunning. They're not scheming. They're not Machiavellian. They're not psychopaths. Most commonly, narcissists and borderlines, especially narcissists, confabulate. Now, confabulation appears to be a lie. When you look at confabulation from the outside, when you listen to a confabulating person, that person would appear to be lying. It's very difficult to tell the difference between confabulation and lying, and we'll discuss confabulation a bit later. Confabulation is a desperate attempt to bridge dissociative memory gaps, kind of lost time or minimal episodic blackouts. And so the narcissist and the borderline more so experience this dissociation on a daily basis, hundreds of times a day. And the memory gaps don't have to be like 5 hours. The memory gap could be 5 seconds or 1/5 of a second, but the memory gaps are there. The lost time is there. And it induces anxiety. This constant discontinuity and disjointedness, they induce anxiety. They make it very difficult to maintain a stable identity across time. And so they require compensation. When you are disabled in any way, physically or mentally, you compensate for it somehow. If your right leg is damaged in an accident, you would tend to lean more on your left leg, and your gait would change. That is known as compensation. Similarly, if you, for example, are ashamed of yourself, you have a repository of shame, if you regard yourself as unworthy, inferior somehow, and so on, you would tend to compensate by pretending that you're exactly the opposite, that you are superior, that you're godlike, that you're a perfect being. This is known as pathological narcissism. So compensation is a classic and very prevalent and dominant mechanism in psychology, especially the psychology of deficiencies. And so the memory gaps, the lost time, the tiny blackouts, the micro blackouts, they require compensation. Somehow the narcissist needs to reestablish the continuity of his life and of his sense of self. And the way to do it is to confabulate. Confabulation can be thought of as a bridge between two islands of memory. The narcissist and the borderline confabulate by extrapolating from past experience. They assume that the future is going to look very much as the past, and that the present reflects both of them faithfully. So they extrapolate, they creatively generate a piece of fiction, a concoction, a plot, a narrative as to what probably, what plausibly might have happened in the missing minutes or seconds. What might have happened. But the confabulation is not outlandish. It's not surrealistic. It's not crazy. It doesn't resemble a hallucination. The confabulation is very reasonable, very logical, very rational. The confabulation is simply a theory, equivalent of a scientific theory. I know, the narcissist says, I know what transpires between point A and point C in time. Usually, in order to traverse from point A to point C, you need to go through point B. So the confabulation is, I remember point A in time, I remember point C in time, I assume the existence of point B, because point B is highly probable, I regard it as true. Confabulating, the act of confabulation, is intended to restore identity continuity and cohesion, and to hide from others the missing segments in the narcissists and borderlines' personal history. Now, confabulation is not a new concept, although I've been the first to apply it to borderline and narcissistic disorders. It's not a new concept. The dictionary of the American Psychological Association defines confabulation this way: the falsification of memory in which gaps in recall are filled by fabrications that the individual accepts as fact. It is not typically, I'm reading from the dictionary, confabulation is not typically considered to be a conscious attempt to deceive others. You heard? That's not Sam Vaknin. That's a dictionary of the American Psychological Association. I repeat, this sentence is very crucial because online self-styled experts and their dogs would tell you otherwise. And as usual, they're spreading misinformation, even those with academic degrees and huge channels. They're spreading misinformation. Confabulation, I'm reading from the dictionary, is not typically considered to be a conscious attempt to deceive others. It's not a lie, therefore. It's not manipulative in nature. It's defensive. Whereas a lie is offensive. It's intended to modify other people's behaviors and perceptions of reality through gaslighting, for example, so that they adhere to certain expectations, they cater to certain needs, and therefore meet certain or obtain certain goals. So, whereas lies are goal-oriented, confabulations are defensive. They are intended to hide the distressing reality of dissociative memory gaps from others. And they're intended to make sense of the narcissist and the borderline's life, personal history, recent past. They're intended to restore a false sense of continuity, of having it all together, of a core identity where there's none. The identity of the narcissist and borderline is diffuse, it's disturbed. So confabulation occurs most frequently in mental health disorders where there is a disruption in memory, a disruption in long-term memory formation, for example, hippocampal issues, and or a disruption in the ability to maintain a coherent, cohesive narrative, for example, in narcissistic and borderline personality disorder, something that is known as identity diffusion. Confabulation occurs, and I'm coming back to the dictionary. I'm reverting to the dictionary. Confabulation occurs most frequently in Korsakoff syndrome. It's an alcoholism-induced damage to the brain, and to a lesser extent in other conditions associated with neurologically based amnesia, for example, Alzheimer's disease. In forensic contexts, eyewitnesses may resort to confabulation if they feel pressured to recall more information than they can remember. So confabulation is not lying. It's not the same. And the reason we believe narcissists and psychopaths is because they believe their own stories. When a narcissist narcissist and borderlines, when a narcissist or a borderline is telling you something, they're not lying. They're confabulating. They believe the veracity and factfulness of their own stories, of their own narratives. So when a narcissist insists that something has happened, or when the borderline contests something you have said, it's not because they're trying to manipulate you, or to lie to you, or to deceive you, or to drive you to any specific behavior, or to obtain a goal. No, none of this. They're just being defensive. They're trying to convince you of their own reality, part of which is reconstructed, part of which comprises the confabulation. Confabulations are effectively a form of false memory, false recall, and they are irresistibly convincing and alluringly reassuring because, number one, the narcissist or borderline honestly and firmly believe the confabulations to be true, and they are communicating this authenticity to you. Number two, they have the power of memories. Confabulations have the power of memories and therefore appear to be objective and authentic. And number three, confabulations are always very likely, very plausible, highly probable, easy to accept by everyone involved, including you, the listener. But in many cases, there's a fourth reason, which is neglected in literature. Confabulation allows everyone involved to negate and to efficaciously ignore painful reality or an uncomfortable alternative scenario or set of facts. All of us, including the confabulator, want to believe the confabulation because the confabulation affords us comfort, succor, peace of mind. It is soothing. Narcissists and borderlines dissociate and confabulate ceaselessly. It is easy to be drawn into the counterfactual alt-reality, alternative reality, the twilight zone of their inventive probabilities, the psychotic or pseudo-psychotic realm of their discontinuous existence. Confirmation bias does the rest. In this twilight zone, having committed ourselves to the narcissist or borderline's version of events, we filter out and we suppress all countervailing information and contradictory or challenging stimuli, facts, and possibilities. This is very common in politics, by the way, and in cults. Confabulation is part of a larger picture of cognitive distortions, a larger landscape of cognitive distortions and cognitive biases. So as you see, the confabulator is deceiving himself first and foremost, deceiving himself into believing that a piece of counterfactual fiction is actually reality, that the narrative that is fantastic is actually closer to reality than, for example, anything science has to say or other people have to say. So the first stage in confabulation is a conversion. The confabulator converts himself or herself into the confabulation. And at that moment, the moment of conversion, this epiphany, the confabulation becomes real, an artifact of truth that cannot be contested. And the confabulator becomes very aggressive and accuses other people of gaslighting if they dare to challenge the confabulation. And as I said, it's part of a larger landscape of biases and so on. One relevant bias is known as the hindsight bias. The hindsight bias is a tendency, after an event had occurred, to overestimate the extent to which the outcome could have been predicted. So, cognitive inputs become selective. People selectively recall information consistent with what now they know to be true. In other words, future information affects past information. Present information affects past information. What you know now reframes, rearranges, and rewrites your history. You're telling yourself, I've known it all along. I have predicted this, or I could have predicted this. So there is, in hindsight bias, there is a situation where present knowledge falsifies the past, thereby generating identity diffusion on the go and eradicating whole swaths of memory. The minute we interfere with memory, the minute we eliminate the authenticity of memory, the minute we challenge the veracity of memory, at that moment, we are actually creating dissociation. Hindsight bias involves retroactive or retrograde dissociation, retrograde amnesia in a way, which then allows to rewrite the personal history in a way which conforms to the present data, to the present information. Metacognitive inputs are involved. People may misattribute their ease of understanding an outcome to its assumed prior likelihood. And there are motivational inputs. People have a need to see the world as orderly and predictable. All this leads to a situation where people would confabulate, confronted with new information that is unsettling, that is challenging, that is upsetting, that is threatening. Confronted with this kind of information, which is ego-dystonic and problematic, people would rather falsify the past. They would rather induce artificial dissociation to allow them to fill in the gaps with confabulation, especially if the confabulation is soothing or it caters to psychological needs. There is something known as the illusory truth effect. It's also known as illusion of truth effect, or validity effect, or truth effect, or reiteration effect. It's a tendency to believe false information to be correct after repeated exposure. One of the things with confabulation is that the narcissist and the borderline insist on it. They keep repeating it. And as Goebbels had said, if you repeat a lie often enough, it is widely perceived to be true, to be the truth. So the repetition, the entrainment, if you wish, the repetition of the lie, the repetition of the confabulation creates a situation where people finally subscribe to the confabulation as a fact and ignore actual facts by suppressing them, reframing them, denying them, ignoring them, attacking them, and attacking the people who believe in them. People believe false information to be correct after repeated exposure. This was first identified in 1977 study at Villanova University and Temple University. You see, we have a very complicated relationship with what we think is true, with the truth. And this allows narcissists and borderlines to induct us, to lure us, to bait us into their counterfactual, confabulated shared fantasy. It also allows psychopaths to take advantage of us and to abuse us and to obtain all kinds of things from us, like sex, money, whatever. Our relationship with the truth is not monovalent. It's not a one-way street. It's not yes, it's not binary. It's not yes, true, no, false. That's not how we relate to the truth. People assess the truth. They evaluate the truth. They gauge the truth. It's a constant process of iteration, constant process of examination, constant stream of evaluation and re-evaluation. People rely on new information to reassess previous truth. People accept information only when it is in line with their understanding or when it feels familiar. That's the confirmation bias. And so when people compare new information with what is already known to be true, that's actually a beneficial process. It's logical, it's rational. But then emotions or affects intervene. And the comparison is not neutral, is not objective, is not scientific, is not logical, is not rational. The comparison is affective. People say, do I feel comfortable with this, with the way I see this new information? Or do I need to rewrite everything to make me feel comfortable? Repetition makes statements easier to process relative to new unrepeated statements. It actually creates physical pathways in the brain. People believe that the repeated conclusion is truthful because it's forcefully asserted. The illusory truth effect is linked to the hindsight bias. The hindsight bias involves this rewriting of reality. And these biases help the narcissist and the borderline to convince us of the truthfulness of their confabulations. Why? Because they sell us on the fantasy. When we want the fantasy to be true, we would rewrite reality, even renounce it, and we would accept the confabulations because they make the fantasy possible. They enable the fantasy. They underlie, they are the fundaments of the fantasy. And without them, the fantasy will fall apart, will disintegrate. So we adopt the confabulations as wholeheartedly as a narcissist and borderline who believe the confabulation to be 100% true. Make, therefore, a distinction between lies, confabulations, and gaslighting. Lies and gaslighting are the instruments of the psychopath. Confabulation is not an instrument. It's not about obtaining goals or manipulating. Confabulation is about making sense of the world, imbuing the world with meaning, purpose, and direction, interpreting the world. Confabulation is part of an organizing theory about the world, a theory of the world. Confabulation is an explanatory, hermeneutic principle. And the narcissists and borderlines who are trying to sell you on the confabulation, they don't know it's a confabulation. By the time they're trying to introduce you to the confabulation, communicate it to you, they are fully invested in it. They fully believe in it. To them, the confabulation is factual. It's a truth. It's a fact. And if you dare to challenge this, if you dare to disagree or criticize them or expose them or something, that means either that you are delusional, the problem is yours, you are misperceiving reality somehow, or you're malevolent and malicious. And make a clear distinction between this defensive posture. My memory is short. I can't make sense of my life and of reality, so I'm going to invent a story or a narrative that would help me to make sense of it. Imbue everything with meaning. That's a narcissist and borderline state of mind. And the psychopath state of mind, which is, I want power, I want sex, I want money, and to obtain all these, I'm going to invent stories and fantasies and lies and deceptions that would manipulate people into behaving in ways which would grant me these goals. So these are worlds apart. There's no connection between narcissistic confabulation and psychopathic lies and gaslighting.